Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Udis. Welcome to this DCTV series on the network of global corporate control. Today's broadcast is about the spring meetings of the World Bank and IMF that just concluded and about the power transition model, which came to the World Bank from the U.S. Department of Defense. This model is telling us with 90 to 95% accuracy that there are coalitions in place to keep us out of World War III. I'd like to start out with giving you a little bit of background. The network of global corporate control is sometimes called One Bank. It's a company that issues paper currencies at no cost and then bribes everyone to go along with their corrupt plans. The One Bank likes wars and wants us to have World War III. Those who resist the One Bank's payola usually get intimidated. As a former fencer, the threats and bribes help me score points, and I have published all of these bribes, attempted bribes, I've never taken one, and threats. And there are many threats because I'm the overseer mandate trustee of the Global Debt Facility, which contains the world's wealth. I have mentioned how Jose Rizal and Ferdinand Marcos deposited the world's wealth in the Global Debt Facility at the end of World War II and then hid it for 50 years so that nobody could argue about it, because after 50 years there can be no claims under the statute of limitations. And maybe you can put that picture up? Yeah, thank you. All this talk about dragons is CIA doublespeak. We have learned in last week's episode about Switzerland's role as the home of the CIA. The CIA is not headquartered in Langley, Virginia, but in Switzerland. My role is that I am in the very center of the world's financial system. I was put there deliberately in 1986 by Dr. Ibrahim Shihada, who was the General Counsel of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries before he became General Counsel of the World Bank. I had written a legislative history about the G77 in 1976. That's now 134 developing countries. I have a long history of whistleblowing and working with the Board of Executive Directors at the World Bank. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I did was to complain to Congress when the executive directors were being blackmailed. Some of them had gone to the same house of ill repute as Eliot Spitzer, and they were being blackmailed when they were trying to fire Paul Wolfowitz. The 188 ministers of finance and development got to know me when they settled my bondholder lawsuit against the World Bank and KPMG in 2012 and reinstated me to the World Bank. I have been exposing the corruption in the courts all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the fact that the United States Constitution of 1789 is not in effect. Last week, I published an email that I wrote to Justice Breyer in the beginning of 2013 after I spoke with Justice Breyer and the French ambassador. It's the 188 ministers of finance and development on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF that administer the world's monetary gold reserves in the Global Debt Facility. The Global Debt Facility also contains the world's wealth: gold, precious metals, art treasures on behalf of humanity, and we've spoken about some of these treasures. The 188 ministers of finance and development made me the overseer mandate trustee of the Global Debt Facility. They have been waiting to see if I could get the American people on board. I am very persistent, and I told them during the spring meetings that the American people are on board. Of course, not all of them, but a significant number. And everyone in the entire planet is now fighting the United States Secret Service, who is really working for the network of global corporate control and not for the United States. I'd like to tell you what happened this past weekend at the spring meetings of the World Bank and IMF. On April 10th, 2016, I wrote to all the ambassadors in Washington and their ministers of finance and development. The letter contained draft minutes approving that the gold in the Global Debt Facility would be used in a global currency reset to end that scam called fractional reserve fiat currency. The global currency reset will implement what John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan set out to do before the Secret Service assassinated and shot our presidents. The draft minutes in my letter to the embassies were approved on April 15th when I drove to 3 strategic embassies. My first stop was Colombia's embassy. Colombia has been appointed by the 134 developing countries in the Group of 77 as their liaison to the World Bank and IMF. Then I went to the Pakistan embassy. Pakistan is one of the 3 countries that told me who was going to negotiate the monetary agreement to mint their international gold reserves into Aurum. Aurum, you remember, is gold pressed very thin, and it handles just like paper currency. Then I went to the Austrian embassy. Austria has said that it is in a strategic alliance with Russia. I know from the power transition model from the Department of Defense that Germany is also headed into this same alliance. Germany is also at the heart of the power transition model and is the swing vote. Germany asked the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury for its gold back. This gold is not with the Federal Reserve or the Treasury Department. It's with the Global Debt Facility. When Germany's request was refused, this was an act of war. Japan is also in this alliance because the United States military cannot defend Japan if the paper currency issued by the one bank, that's the Federal Reserve note, crashes. You can't pay the military with a devalued, crashed currency. And this means that the United States is also, with 95% likelihood, going to kick out the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, I'm telling you this. It's a story that you're not going to find in the mainstream media because there is a media blackout on this story. When we started this series at DCTV a year ago, I told you to watch to see what was happening with the public opinion on the press, that this was a very good indicator, and if the network of global corporate control was winning or not. If people lose their trust in the press, this is an indicator that we, the Coalition for the Rule of Law, is winning. That's because the media is owned by the network of global corporate control, including most of the alternative media outlets. And I'm going to make a little aside here for the teleprompter. Just today, somebody sent me an email with a story that was very similar to what I've been telling you, with a few twists on it. It had extraterritorial ETs on it and some galactic garbage thrown in. This is simply to confuse people. You're hearing what's actually going on here at DCTV. At the end of March, the American Press Institute and Associated Press Center for Public Affairs Research polled 2,000 adults. They found that 6% of the people have a lot of confidence in the media. 6%. That's not enough, is it? Many people have come to realize that they're getting good information about what is real and what is fake from this network on global corporate control, this show. For the past year that we have had this DCTV series on the network of global corporate control, I've been interacting with the public at large through social media and through the archives on the show, which we post up on YouTube. This feedback loop has enabled me to expose the corruption in the legal profession, to expose the murder of Justice Anton Scalia, and to expose the attempted nuke of Charleston, South Carolina on October 7th, 2013. And if you go and look on the comments page, you can see that people are very serious about this Coalition for the Rule of Law. When I hear from people that are interested in helping all of humanity clean up the world's financial system, I learn a lot. This is, as you've seen, sometimes I put a cartoon up showing me as a switchboard operator. I'm passing messages up and down the line. And one of the messages that I got, which was extremely valuable information, was about a website in Moscow State University showing how our ancient history has been deliberately falsified since the 1600s. On my way to the World Bank and IMF annual meetings, Nick Bain, who was the person who told me about the Chronologia website, called me on my cell phone. I was very happy to take the call because you can imagine how anxious I was going into the spring meetings. I knew that a lot was riding on that meeting, like keeping us out of World War III, for instance. Knowing that the odds are in our favor via the CENTIA power transition model is very reassuring, but it's one thing to have an accurate model, and it's quite another to realize it in reality. Nick Bain is a member of a group called the National Liberty Alliance, which has members in many of our counties, and the National Liberty Alliance is trying to help people stay in their homes when the one bank tries to take away their homes through foreclosures. The National Liberty Alliance wrote a letter to all of the state governors, and I dropped out of that group when it looked like what the National Liberty Alliance was trying to do was to arrest the governors. That is sedition. It turned out that this was not at all what the National Liberty Alliance intended. That's what they wrote in their paperwork. I showed it to them. They said, oh, well, we're going to correct that. That is not what we intend to do. It appears that some people in the National Liberty Alliance may be sabotaging the National Liberty Alliance deliberately. But this correspondence to the governors sure got their attention. Before the annual meeting of the World Bank and IMF, I asked Governor Larry Hogan and Maryland's Adjutant General, that is the liaison of the National Guard to the governor, Linda L. Singh, as well as the Adjutant General for the state of Texas, Major General John Nichols, and the rest of the state governors and adjutant generals, whether the Constitution of 1789 is in effect or whether we are in interregnum. Texas is important for two reasons. Texas is the state that tried to do a coronary inquest into the cause of sudden death of Justice Anton Scalia. You'll recall that Justice Anton Scalia died mysteriously 3 days after we called him out for corruption on our program. Texas is also the state where we are going to print Treasury dollars to replace the Federal Reserve notes so that the United States does not surrender unilaterally. The CIA and the Secret Service work for the one bank. They do not work for the United States. As we discussed in last week's segment, the CIA is located in Switzerland and works for the one bank. It was the Secret Service that assassinated John F. Kennedy. JFK accessed the U.S. monetary gold reserves in the global debt facility by signing the Green-Hilton Agreement 8 days before his murder. It was the Secret Service who gave Hinckley an unobstructed shot at Ronald Reagan. This is because Ronald Reagan printed U.S. Treasury dollars to replace unconstitutional Federal Reserve notes. Ronald Reagan also commissioned the Grace Report that showed how all of our income taxes were leaving the country to go to the one bank whose branches in the United States are called the Federal Reserve. I called the office of the Swiss executive director along with all the other executive directors when the Secret Service was locking me out of the Development Committee meeting at the spring meetings of the World Bank. I asked Switzerland if they are going to release the Treasury dollars that Ronald Reagan printed that are held by the UBS, that's the Union Bank of Switzerland, in an account owned by the Global Debt Facility. I did not get a satisfactory answer. We are facing another dark ages if we do not replace the Federal Reserve notes for Treasury dollars in a global currency reset. And let's show the pictures of the denarius and the Federal Reserve note. What happened in the 300s, if you can stop the teleprompter and get that up. Yeah, you see the picture of the denarius. What was going on then was the Romans were taking all of the copper out of the coins and the other metals out of the coins. So the coins were becoming devalued. And then if you look at the graph of what the dollar is worth vis-a-vis gold, you can see that they're trying to crash the Federal Reserve note. That's the second picture, which has that's the one, yeah. This thing called quantitative easing, that's just a gobbledygook term. They're trying to devalue our currency, make it valueless, And you can tell by the articles that are appearing now in the press that we are very close to the dollar completely crashing. Nobody wants to hold it. It's toxic. It was decided a long time ago by the BRICS, that Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, that they were not going to use the dollars in their trade. They were going to offset against their own currencies. That's 25% of trade. And this past year, the 134 developing countries in the G77 also announced in Bolivia that they were going to do exactly the same thing. Now, this was not covered by the mainstream media, but it happened nevertheless. And so we have a period of time. Now, what is going on is that these countries are looking very avidly to see how we are reacting to the news that we do not have to have a crashed economy. We don't have to surrender unilaterally. All we have to do is follow the power transition model. It says that it's 95% likely, and exchange the Federal Reserve notes for the Treasury dollars. And if we can't get them from the dollars that are already printed by Ronald Reagan and held by UBS, and we're entitled to them, we simply ask to withdraw our account. The Global Debt Facility has the account in UBS, but if Switzerland, as the place where the CIA is located, would rather throw the world into World War III, we will simply print the dollars, the Treasury dollars, ourselves. There is a plant in Texas. I'm in touch with a man who knows very well how that plant operates, and we will get the National Guard to go in and let us print our dollars. And people are going to be watching very carefully to see whether we are a country that is cohesive enough to assert ourselves, or whether we are so far gone that we will just lose our country and we will surrender unilaterally. Now I'm going to go back to the teleprompter. The German, Japanese, and Brazilian executive directors admitted me into the spring meetings, but the Secret Service prevented me from going into the World Bank. The Secret Service needed to find someone inside the World Bank to lie and say that I was supposed to be locked out. Martin Krauss in the World Bank Security Department, who had been fired the previous day, was dragged back to sign a barring notice saying he was allowed to run the World Bank instead of the Board of Executive Directors. This barring notice also lied and said that I refused to leave the property. I was never on the property. The Secret Service prevented me from going into the registration desk on the property where the security badge that the executive directors had issued to me was waiting for me. And now I'm going to show you a little video that I took outside the headquarters building of the IMF before the security guards chased me away. I left because I didn't want to go to jail. You can see that I did not have time to get the camera lined up for my headshot and that the sound quality was not good. I'm going to show this to you anyway.
That was a hassle. That was like 70 pounds light and everything.
Just testing to see if I'm on camera now. Where do we stand, and when are we going to have our global currency reset? I spoke to many delegates outside the meetings, and they are aware that they are being scammed by the One Bank, and that a very powerful coalition is in place to end this scam. One of the countries that I spoke to was Greece. Another of the delegates that I spoke to was Japan. I can tell you a lot about what went on during the meetings, but I'd like actually to tell you about an email and a fax which I sent this morning to the World Bank. It was to Ms. Leroy, who is the General Counsel of the World Bank. Many people's eyes glaze over when lawyers start talking technical talk, but this will tell you exactly where we stand. It is actually quite good, because what I said to Ms. Leroy is, if you read the articles of the World Bank, which is what governs these were written specifically to say whether people would get their gold that was put into hiding, and it put the Board of Governors in charge. It's not the president of the World Bank or the managing director of the IMF or any of the staff inside the World Bank. It's certainly not Allied Barton, who is a company that are serving as security guards. So what I said in this letter was just very simply that the job of the lawyer inside the World Bank was to interpret the articles. If you read the articles, it says that it's not just the lawyer's job, but it's primarily the executive director's job. The very first meeting of the board and the Board of Governors, the United States reassured the countries. You can imagine how nervous they were putting all of their monetary gold reserves in a co-op, whether that co-op was going to be run according to what was written on paper. And what the United States said was, yes, it is up to the executive directors to interpret the articles. And so what I said in my letter was the articles are very clear that when 3 executive directors asked for me to be admitted into those meetings, there was nobody who had any authority to keep me out because they're the ones that call the shots. And one of the other things that was also very interesting, you see, I'm in the very center of this financial system, and everybody can write me. They just simply have to go to my website and hit the contact page, or maybe, Carmen, you can show my email address, and I respond personally to all the emails. Now, I'm not there to be your pen pal, but I certainly am there to learn things that I need to know. And one of the things that somebody told me was they told me to go and read the press release that was issued when the Development Committee met. And don't forget, I had written minutes of this meeting, and I had sent them to all of the Board of Governors. They all know exactly what's going on. And I've put them out on the internet so everybody in their countries knows that this gold is available for them in their currency. There's no reason to pay anything on country debt, because inside the global debt facility are bonds worth $2 quadrillion. This offsets any country debt. So the very first thing that happens is we end these payments to the one bank. They're not entitled to them. It's a scam. And we will be issuing paper currencies on an interim basis until we can mint the gold that belongs to each and every country. But the most important currency is the local currencies. A lot of people get nervous. They see how the World Bank and the IMF have been corrupted, and they figure that, that these institutions can't be trusted. And I have to say that it's not going to be an easy job to get all of this gold minted and into the hands of people in their currency, in the global currency reset. We're going to have to work collaboratively together. And this means when you're reading articles about arresting all of the officers, this is not happening. We have got to have a peaceful transition. And if the people that are now in office think that they're going to jail, they are not going to collaborate peacefully. And we are going to end up in World War III. But the likelihood that we're able to pull it together and cooperate and manage to get this exchange done, it is not rocket science. Just think about it. If we all know that we're going to get this currency and we all cooperate, and there's been a lot of questions about whether the governments could be trusted. The governments are not going to have very much of a role in this exchange. The way it's going to happen is we're going to be working with the mints directly. We're going to know exactly how much gold they get, and you are going to know exactly how much currency comes out and whether any of that gold goes missing. And if the gold goes missing, we will know it and we will find it. And there will be accountability as we work together. But at this moment, where we now are, our history, as you have seen from that Moscow website, we haven't really known what's been happening. We've been given false information, and it's extremely difficult to hold people to account when you don't know what was going on. And as far as our politicians, you see what happens to them. They've been assassinated. They've been surrounded and assassinated by the one bank. I'm not trying to condone anything that anybody has done, but it's very, very clear that this has been a systemic problem. And if we don't approach it with the idea that there is amnesty, there will not be a global currency reset. That's part and parcel of the global currency reset. But one of the points that I have promoted, and this is something that we're all going to have to consider, but what I have said is that each individual is going to be allowed to exchange the treasury dollars for gold currency up to $1 million. This means that we're not going to have people are going to have property. We're not taking away their property, but as far as their currency, they're not going to be able to exchange more than 1 million per person. And then the rules for additional currency. This is going to be established in each and every country. The other thing that is going to be decided on, this is something that has never happened, that the curtains have been revealed to corruption of such an extent. We have seen it on a smaller scale. That's what happened with Enron, when the board was shown to have done such a terrible job in management that the entire company was corrupt. This is where we are in our international financial system. It's got to be reconstructed from the ground up, and it's got to be done in a collaborative way. When I was leaving the meetings, I wasn't sure exactly where we were going with all of this. I had a pretty good idea that things were not so bad, because if 3 executive directors were pushing for me to be admitted, I knew that this was just what I needed. They were exactly the countries that I would have expected in the power transition model. That was Germany and that was Japan. These are the countries that are depending on the United States military. And these countries know that it's not the fault of the people in the United States what has happened to our foreign policy, because we have been under a state capture. It's been the people working as lackeys of the one bank that have been directing our country. And we've seen this in many ways. We've seen proof of this. There was a recent study which showed that the U.S. Congress was not looking at what the citizens wanted. They were simply looking at what the one bank wanted. In today's segment, we discussed the spring meeting of the World Bank and IMF, whose ministers of finance and development on the Board of Governors are responsible for using the world's wealth in the global debt facility for the benefit of humanity. The minutes of the Development Committee have been approved. In these minutes, it says that the world's monetary gold reserves are being minted to replace unconstitutional paper currency, that the secret military rule in the United States is not legitimate, and we are returning to the Constitution of 1789, that villages and towns are issuing their own local currencies, and that country debt is only a scam because the one bank owes us more than we owe them. Thank you for joining us. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudes.